Keeping an open mind has always been a really important aspect of my personal whiskey experience, and I certainly intend on it to continue to be so. And there's a lot of different ways that we can keep an open mind. And today I want to talk about one of those, and this is even if a distillery and their official bottlings are looked down on, generally speaking, at least by a good portion of the modern day whiskey enthusiast community, it doesn't mean that those distilleries do not make good whiskey. And trying to seek them out and then also appreciating them for what they are and maybe not so much for what they aren't can oftentimes lead you to some very fantastic experiences, such as the three bottles I'm going to be talking about today. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian, and we are back for another whiskey chat. We're not doing a whiskey review today. Again, I just felt like doing something a little more laid back, casual, and just talk about some things that are a little bit more natural to me instead of sitting down and trying to analyze and score and recommend a bottle of whiskey to you all. So last week, if you didn't see it, we talked about two Kleinlich bottlings, two independent bottlings from Signatory that were very, very similar, but also very, very different in certain ways. If you like to geek out about whiskey bottles, I recommend going to check that out. We're doing something a little different this week, but we do have three independent bottlings. Kind of the middle one is a private cask, so it's kind of like an independent bottling because someone chose that specific bottle and it was pretty limited. It's a single barrel from Glenmurray in this case. I'm just going to refer to these three as independent bottlings, even though one technically isn't because it is in the Glenmurray branding. And the bottles I chose are three distilleries that are relatively well known. All three of these distilleries have core ranges, pretty widely distributed core ranges for that matter. But there are certainly three distilleries that, from a enthusiast perspective, we do tend to either look past or even maybe in some cases look down on. But I've always approached whiskey as if a distillery has been around for a long time, it means that they're capable of making good whiskey. We kind of went into this with the Jura bottling from a month or two ago now, where it's like I know they can make good whiskey, and I've tasted it from independent bottlings, but you just never give up on a distillery. They have to make good whiskey, or they wouldn't have made it 100 years, 150 years, 200 plus years. They've at some point have made good whiskey, and their equipment is there. It's all set up to do so. It's just, what do they actually decide to bottle? And thank God for independent bottlings. So often these allow us to get to know distilleries that have really been around forever. And maybe at one time, especially if you're a newer drinker like myself, who's only been really into whiskey for 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, this is an opportunity to get to know some distilleries that maybe are kind of lost to us at this point, at least in terms of what they're putting on the shelf at 40%, poor, tired casks, overcolored, overfiltered, all the stuff, right? Independent bottlings, and now more and more so, these private cask bottlings are at least allowing us to experience these distilleries at something much closer to their full capabilities and experience the character that maybe some other people who have been in this hobby a little bit longer than, say, myself, may have gotten to know through more official means. So why don't I tell you about these bottles? I do have a little bit poured out, but we're not going to do reviews again this week. This is more just me kind of letting you know some bottles from some overlooked distilleries that if you get an opportunity from a respected independent bottler, don't be afraid to try some bottles from these distilleries that we maybe wouldn't really look twice at their official range. But I'm going to start actually with the oldest example because it is the lowest ABV. This is a Auchentoshan. We have Glenmurray here, and this one is a Glenrothes. The Auchentoshan is the oldest at 22 years old, but it is also by far the lowest ABV. So from a tasting perspective, I'm gonna start with this one. So by the time I get to this one, my palate isn't completely burnt out. So anyways, this is an old particular bottling. This is from Douglas Lang. as I mentioned, this is distilled at Auchentoshan from the lowland region, 22 years old, matured in a refill hogshead, reference DL13642. This single cask was distilled in May 1997 and bottled in October of 2019. No coloring, no chill filtration, bottled at 51.5%. Yeah, refill hogshead. So almost certainly bourbon here. This bottle, I think, was floating around in the States for a little while. Because I think I had I saw this bottle in Denver and I didn't buy it. I almost did. I don't remember what it was priced there, or it was. I think that was actually in Colorado Springs, technically speaking. I moved to San Diego, and K&L had this in stock, and for a 22-year-old at $170, which is what I paid for this back a couple years ago now, probably. Um, that's still a pretty good price for a 22-year-old whiskey, cask strength, $170. Right, we're buying a lot of 18-year-old whiskeys at 46% official bottlings at around that price these days, unfortunately. So a pretty solid deal if you ask me. So Auchentoshan, an interesting distillery in the lowlands of Scotland. The lowlands basically border Ireland, and a lot of the lowland distilleries have traditionally also triple distilled their whiskey. I'm not an expert on the specific differences between double distillation and triple distillation in terms of the output. I have been able to kind of pick Irish style whiskeys out of blinds essentially. Or no, actually I take that back. I think it was another Auchentoshan that I called out as possibly being Irish not too long ago in a blind, even though I don't even drink that many Irish whiskey. So that is kind of a distinct note that at least I'm able to pick up on somewhat. But yeah, their core range is really, it's almost like Jura and Auchentoshan are almost not that far off from each other in terms of, I think, how people view them. Maybe Auchentoshan's a little bit more just on the super bland and boring side, where the Jura range tends to be actively just looked down on because it actually tastes bad, and I can confirm that since when I haven't actually put it in a video yet, but yes, I do have a bottle of Jura 12. You may have noticed it at the end of the Jura 16 video where it was on my desk, and I decided to cut that part of the video out because that video was going to be long enough as it was, and it didn't need to have a rant in it. But anyways, Auchentoshan kind of lands, at least in my mind, in terms of the general opinion of the enthusiasts, the online community, at least a good portion of it, as just being something that is just avoid it. Don't even think about getting it. I've never bought an official bottling of Auchentoshan. I will at some point here, just because, as I mentioned, I'm kind of on I'm on a mission to learn about whiskey, and that includes drinking stuff that maybe I don't really want to buy a bottle of it, but if I'm going to talk about it, and like I am kind of now, I really would prefer to have at least had a bottle to have a reference point. Anyways, I will tell you that this 22-year-old, out of these three bottles, is probably the best bottle. It's the oldest, it's the most complex, it's very good. I will say it's probably becoming my favorite. I kind of differentiate my favorite and best because a favorite can be something super simple, and it's just something that I really like to go back to and enjoy drinking, or I can kind of acknowledge that maybe something else is much more deeply layered and just interesting flavors and great finish and the whole thing. But yes, this Auchentoshan 22, I think out of these three is the best bottle. Not super surprising depending on how you look at it. But yeah, why don't we do a quick nosing and tasting, and I'll just give you a general idea of what I get from this. Here we go. Yeah, you're just immediately hit with that like shortbread and honey, the classic. It's often associated with Irish whiskey. And see why I may have called this out as possibly being Irish in a blind. The nose itself isn't stunning or amazing. It's comforting, definitely probably somewhat simple. The age is giving it a bit of a depth to it, right? It's taking that honey, and if you really kind of give it a good inhale, it really starts moving into that like deeper honeycomb, not quite waxy, but almost can give you a little hint here and there. Let's get into the palate and see how it's tasting. Cheers. All the things I said about the nose are almost like intensified. more clearly on the palate. Good mouthfeel. The 51.5%. That's really around my favorite ABV, that kind of 50 to 52, at least when it comes to Scotch. Yeah, the shortbread, the honey really going more towards honeycomb. It's vanilla. It's such a subtle, gentle kind of development in the finish as the flavor just kind of comes in and out ever so slowly, going from kind of sweeter to a little bit more of the malty, that shortbread. There's just like on the nose, there's just a little bit of a oaky presence. It's subtle on the finish here. That refill hogshead is just giving it just a touch of wood after 22 years. This is by far probably the most elegant of the three because these are much younger and much higher ABV. that's one good reason why. But man, just a delicious all around experience. All right, try to keep these short. Let's go on to our second bottle. This officially branded Glenmurray. This was a private cask selection from Warehouse Liquors in Chicago, Illinois. If you're ever in Chicago, it's probably one of the better stops, especially if you're downtown, to stop in, and you're going to find a pretty wide selection of Scotch and independent bottlings. They do their own private casks. This one is Glenmurray. This is a first fill bourbon, distillation date October 26, 2010. It's aged 11 years. And this one is coming in at 58.64% ABV. So this one's been open for a little while, although I haven't drank too much of it. I did just finish off another independent bottling, a Duncan Taylor 14-year-old Glenmurray, that I was nursing. It was one of my favorite bottles on my shelf. It was one of the bottles, or probably over 2 years ago now, where I really discovered like my love for bourbon casks, and it was largely due to that bottle. And Kevin got me this for my birthday this past year, or a few months back, and he sent me this in a blind as well. Talked about blind with the Auchentoshan, but and I absolutely love this. I was like melting over it, and he's like, you know what? Since he's still in the area, he lives in the area. He decided to grab me one, and I really appreciate that because it was perfect timing. It let me kind of kill off my Duncan Taylor Glenmurray that I was nursing for a really long time and move on to this one. So Glenmurray has been one of those distilleries that for me, it's basically like a pet distillery of mine. I reviewed the 18-year-old back about this time last year, somewhere in there. I did a whole series on the 18-year-old official bottlings, and I gave it a 6 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. It was the most affordable bottling of the bunch, but yeah, the complexity wasn't quite there, but it was still really, really good. But here's the thing. A bottle doesn't have to be complex. It's okay for a bottle of whiskey to be simple, provided the thing that it does, the thing or two that it does, you really like. And that is Glenmurray for me. I've never had a complex Glenmurray. I'm sure they exist. But yes, Glenmurray bourbon casks are just a simple pleasure that I absolutely love. And I'm not going to apologize for it. You can call it a guilty pleasure if you want. But yeah, I don't feel bad about it. Let's do a quick nosing and tasting of this one as well, and we'll move on to the final bottle. Yeah, so definitely a step up in ABV. But the thing about Glenmurray is its fruitiness. It's a very fruity whiskey, at least when it's in the bourbon cask, and it's the definition of that like tropical bourbon cask fruitiness that we can find in Scotch, where this is probably a little more pineapple, very fresh. It borders on overripe, actually. It's not quite as like meaty as Ben Nevis. It's not that characterful, which is expected. It's not what it's trying to be. But yeah, vanilla, pineapple. I haven't experimented with this one too much. Obviously, it's very, very. This is only probably maybe the third or fourth pour out of here, so I haven't played with this with water. I haven't added water to this one yet, but let's taste it and see if we can recreate the magic of the blind tasting. Cheers. Yeah, it is still a little tight. Obviously a fairly high ABV at that 58.4, 0.64, sorry. It's been open for a little while now, but I haven't drank much of it. So it's still a little tight, but it's getting there. And yeah, it's simple. Glen Murray bourbon cask, it's probably going to be a simple experience. So you have to really like the thing it does. And I certainly do. Wasn't getting a ton of the fruit. We'll see if the second sip brings that out. Yeah, it's there. It wants to come out. Probably a few drops of water would probably help this one along or help my palate today. It's somewhat it's somewhat unfortunate that I didn't make this video with that Duncan Taylor, because that one I was absolutely in love with, and I'm sure I will be with this one as well. But oh man, this one is, we talked about biscuitiness on the Auchentoshan. The back finish on this one is just like, yeah, it is a very kind of dry, biscuity finish. Anyways, still very delicious. The point being is that I am a sucker for these Glen Murray bottlings. First fill bourbon on this one, you can definitely taste that in the palate. Is very flavorful. It's keeping up. It's helping it keep up with the ABV, the flavor. But I think the ABV and the cask are, at least at this point, hiding some of the fruitiness I know is in here. So hopefully that'll come out in time, and maybe a few drops of water. But I'm always going to have an independent bottling of Glen Murray on my shelf if I have a choice. There's not really much of a reason to have like a whole selection of them on your shelf, because they are going to be simple. They are going to be fairly straightforward bottles, but again, maybe somewhat similar to the Auchentoshan, although the Auchentoshan definitely has a little more subtlety and complexity going on. All right, I'm rushing through these a little bit, maybe not. Sometimes I'm surprised by how long it took on the video, but yep, we're going to move on from the Glen Murray, and keep an eye out, particularly if you see refill hogsheads of Glen Murray. It's been a minute since I've been sitting in front of the camera, and I've forgotten how to talk, apparently. But let's go to the final bottle that we have here. This is a bottle I've had on the shelf for quite a while. It is pretty low. This is kind of the inspiration for even doing this one. This video is just give me a reason to talk about this. This is, yes, we do have a interesting art sticker, a tater sticker, as we call it here in the U.S., or at least the bourbon world calls it that. But yeah, signatory vintage, Glen Rothes, distilled in 2010. This is 11 years old, distilled February 5th, 2010, bottled May 24th, 2021. This is matured in a hogshead. I always love some of the signatory bottlings was matured in not just hogshead, a hogshead. A is in lowercase. Cask number, and the hogshead is capitalized. Cask number 883, bottle number 113. This is coming in at 64.5% ABV. This was probably barreled at still strength, but I did talk about the tater sticker on the back. This was selected. This is another like group selection. So this is back when I was in Colorado. This is a selection from the Colorado Gentlemen's Society, who I know many of them personally, and they did a collaboration with a group called the Sinners Club, and they collaborated on this bottle, split it between those two groups, and just made it available to everyone. I remember that I was talking about the distiller, or the people who picked this bottle, and I mentioned the tater sticker. Let me move the mic and try to get this closer. It is it's some personal artwork by Felipe Roche, Feliperoche. It is some Japanese koi. So the so-called tater sticker is very popular in the bourbon community. If you do a barrel pick, you have custom artwork done, slap it on there. It can raise the value of your bottles, because the sticker can be funny. It can be not so funny. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Let's move on with a quick nosing and tasting of this one. Here we go. This one is a malt bomb. This one smells exactly like I've always remembered it. This is that kind of wet, damp, dank grain. It's kind of a little IPA resinous, right? It's got just those sort of very kind of hoppy kind of quality without with no sharpness or anything. It's just a very damp and dank sort of smell. Yeah, this is one of those, if you're a beer IPA lover, like West Coast IPAs that just almost smells like it came out of a dispensary sort of situation. It's, yeah, you can also go just like very like strongly scented, like bales of hay, of almost farm like in that sort of regard, slightly fermenty qualities. It's all very well balanced and very there's nothing that's just one thing that's jumping out and being overly aggressive, but it's pretty well integrated, but it does have just a little bit of a funk to it in that sense. It's not like Springbank funk, it's a different kind. All right, let's taste it. Here we go. So as I mentioned, that 50 to 52% is like my sweet spot for scotch. The closer you get to 60% for me, most scotches need some water. Bourbons, no. Bourbons can go to 70 plus percent. Those are intense, but they don't need water. Water does change the flavor, sometimes for the better, sometimes not, but pretty rarely are you going to find me adding water to bourbon. But scotch, once it gets up close to that 60% ABV, it's usually tight. It's almost kind of flavorless. It struggles most of the time. Now, a few drops of water, maybe even one or two, particularly when something is 60% ABV, it's not bringing down the ABV that much, but it just seems to loosen it up enough to let all of the flavors come out. This bottle doesn't need water at 64.5%, right? Yeah. It may still benefit from it, but I've enjoyed this one because of how full and intense the flavor was. This is probably the closest bourbonish, like it doesn't taste like bourbon, but the most bourbon-like experience from a scotch I think I've ever had, which is probably why the group picked it, because they could probably convince their bourbon drinker core, which almost certainly is the case, to pick up a bottle of scotch like this. As primarily a scotch drinker, this also suits me too, because it is kind of actually weird, which is almost makes me think that maybe bourbon drinkers wouldn't like this that much, because this is funky in a way that is very not reminiscent of bourbon. Like again, it's damp, dank, very kind of very vanilla and honey and grassy, but it's in a moldy old cellar. I've loved that bottle from the first sip, and it's definitely something that has even made me almost consider picking up like an official bottling of Glenrothes at some point, just to see if there's any similarities there. And again, at some point I will, but we'll see. We'll see. Anyways, these are 3 bottles from distilleries that are overlooked oftentimes by at least the people I tend to associate with, and I'm sure many of you as well. But these are 3 examples that, even whether they're simple or they're kind of slightly off the beaten path, or whether they do have some really subtle complexity due to their age, at a relatively speaking, in modern day, acceptable price. Like you can't just ignore a bottle purely based on the distillery it came from. I guess maybe over time with experience you can kind of start to rule them out. But it can't just be because, oh, their official bottlings are bad, so the independent bottlings are going to be bad too. It's not the case, at least not always. Thank you for indulging me on this couple weeks, just kind of nerd trip, just to drink some of the stuff that's been on my shelf, the things I've been really enjoying. Whether they are like the Kleinlich bottles from last week, just super complex and just some of the best bottles on my shelf, or bottles like these that are really, really good. And if you're looking for ultra complexity, then maybe these aren't for you. If that's your only line of, that's your only mark of quality, maybe these aren't for you. But I love simplicity. But these distilleries are making good whiskey. Even if some of the whiskey that was in this bottle maybe at one point was distilled and engineered and manufactured to be into a ubiquitous blend or just a at best boring bottle on a supermarket shelf, these independent bottlers and the people doing these exclusive cask picks are doing work, uh, finding the best of the best for us, and find some of these bottlers that you trust and that you know that you're gonna. Signatory is probably the middle of the road on all of them. Like, you're probably not going to get a bad bottling from them. It might not be super exciting, but you're going to get something that's actually representative of what the distillery is capable of making. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching here again this week at Whiskey Uncorked. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate all your feedback down in the comments. If you made it to the end of the video, I hope you can hit the like button. And if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. It helps me so much. We are kind of on the march towards 1,000 subs for a small Scotch channel that started up in the middle of, or at the start of the downturn. Yeah, it'll just be a great milestone to hit that 1,000 subs. We're on the march now. We're up 850 or so at this point, somewhere in the area. Yeah, probably back to reviews next week. I really do appreciate it. We'll be getting into some more standard kind of 10, 12-year-old, or even some non-age stated official releases coming up. Maybe we'll throw in some occasional what am I drinking this week sort of videos, or what's on my shelf sort of videos. Anyways, I really do appreciate it. Hopefully see you next week. I do have a sip of the Auchentoshan left. Thank you so much. See you next week.